Hello everyone, this is Velodreamer. I'm starting to explain how I repaired the surface of my Velomobile after a crash. For those who follow me regularly, you already know that I misjudged a turn and crashed into a dirt wall, damaging the surface of the Velomobile. I've made a separate video showing the damage, and today I'll finally start the repairs. I've already explained how the accident happened in this video here. Now let's talk about how I plan to repair it. First, I'll reinforce the structure from the inside. This is how the fiberglass structure looks when undamaged. We have a decorative layer on the outside, which doesn't have any reinforcing fibers, and underneath there's the main fiberglass, which is glass cloth soaked in cured epoxy resin, or polyester resin in my case. The difference between these is that the reinforced layer can tolerate significant bending without cracking. Even if it does crack, it won't tear. The non-reinforced decorative layer, however, can't handle bending at all. It cracks almost instantly and chips away. This is exactly what we saw after the impact. The reinforced lower layer sustains less damage because it's stronger, while the glossy layer comes off in sheets. The first step in the repair process is to patch the main layer from the inside, restoring the integrity of the reinforced layer. It's just a patch glued from underneath. This is the easy part. The next step is applying filler to the outer decorative layer. This is a bit trickier because it's nearly impossible to apply the filler perfectly. It tends to spread over the undamaged areas. But the worst part is that when applying the filler, it goes on unevenly. Some of it sticks out too much, which isn't a big deal, but some spots remain below the required level, marked with circles, creating the need for another filler application. Getting it perfect on the first try is very difficult, so it's usually done in several stages. After sanding down the excess that sticks out, I'll apply the second layer of filler. Usually the second layer can be much thinner, and the areas that need it are easy to spot. Then, just like the first layer, I'll sand it down to make everything flush. The result is a sort of layered cake. This structure weighs more than it did before the repair, and its strength might be slightly reduced, though not necessarily. A nearly identical appearance to the pre-crash condition can be achieved. Wherever there are external cracks, patches need to be applied from the inside, like here, and in this spot too. Once they've hardened, the poorly adhered paint will be removed and I can start applying the first filler layer. After that, it might need to be painted as well. You can see that in some places, the gel coat layer is too thick. It would be great to perfect the application technique so the layer is as thin as possible, like here, or even thinner. This would help reduce the weight of the body. Let's begin, and at the same time, I'll inspect everything. It's been a while since I flipped it over. These rubber bands here are installed to reduce the noise from the suspension, and they work really well. This crack was from the first collision with an obstacle 2 years ago. It wasn't too bad. Here's what it looks like inside. I used some filler here to attach the wires to the walls. In some places the filler spread out, so now I'll have to work with it in this position on its side. And here's another interesting point. This piece was glued to the front part, and I was sure it was necessary for strength to connect the support bar that holds the bottom bracket with the pedals to the body. But after the crash, it broke off. As you can see, it got pushed back, dented, and then bounced back into place. This actually absorbed the impact quite well. And surprisingly, even though it's no longer glued, I didn't notice any changes in the way the Velomobile handles on the road. This means that this part can be made removable. The nose can be detachable while still having the bar connected to it. Here's another crack. Let's get started. First, I need to clean all the areas that will come into contact with the resin to make them more suitable for adhesion. I prefer using patches instead of a large single sheet and cutting them in advance. Then I'll soak them all at once and start applying them. Here are my brushes. This one is too small and this one is too large. The brushes are kept in solvent. This is a cocktail shaker. Here's another one, and here's a brush of the right size. They're stored in acetone. The resin, this time I'm using resin without an indicator. Ugh, that's terrible. Just regular pink resin. I'm pouring about 200 grams. Now, I'll add the hardener, also known as the catalyst. Better to add more than less. I'd rather have it set quickly than stink up the cabin for a whole week, because I need to use this Velomobile regularly. Better to waste an extra 100 grams of resin than to endure that lovely aroma. I'm leaving the soaked pieces here on the edge of the box. By the way, this box used to be meat packaging. Here's how to make filler. Just add aerosol to the leftover resin so it doesn't go to waste. You can use it to fill the holes, at least partially. Let's call this the preliminary layer. Here's the result. I patched all the internal damage that I could find. I also had some leftover resin with hardener, so I thickened it with aerosol and filled the damage. This is the cheap option. Now, I'll need less of the expensive, higher quality final filler, which I'll apply during the next step after the first round of sanding. In this spot, I didn't patch from the inside because I couldn't reach it, so I only applied the top layer of filler. Another interesting observation, when the Velomobile was on its side, it was clear that the front part of the Velomobile was white and free of dirt, even though I hadn't washed it before. Everything behind the wheels, though, was completely covered in dirt underneath. It's an interesting observation that shows the spray patterns and their density. Now it's time to sand what's already hardened. I've been using the Velomobile in this condition for more than 2 weeks now. The problem with this repair is that my Velomobile always needs to be operational so I can ride it to work. I'm using this orbital sander. Turn it on and I start sanding. process of leveling the surface is quite laborious. It sands very slowly. The sander removes all the raised areas and reveals the depressions. Then, I'll need to fill the depressions with a new layer of filler and remove the raised areas again. And I'll keep repeating this process until the surface is completely smooth. Anything loose should be peeled off. Of course, the surface will never be like new again, but from a certain distance, it'll look just fine to others. Of course, if you look closely, you'll be able to see traces of the damage. But again, with enough time and effort, you could make it look like there was never any damage here at all. The downside is that I have to use the Velomobile every day, so I can't just leave it off the road and take my time with the repairs. Right now, I don't have that luxury, unfortunately. The next day, I made this semi-liquid filler about the consistency of sour cream so that it better fills the small cracks. Now I'll start applying it to the surface. Let's begin with an old scratch that I never got around to fixing. Here's how it's applied. I added white pigment to the filler to reduce the amount of painting required because I don't have much time for repairs, and this way the damage is less noticeable while I ride the Velomobile between repair stages during the work week. This won't be the final layer, but with each step you're getting closer to a proper surface. That was the first layer, and this will be the second layer. It's important to leave raised areas, not depressions. If there are depressions left, I'll have to apply a third layer. Here's how it looks after applying the second layer of filler. In some spots where I couldn't peel off the reflective tape, it bubbled up from contact with the styrene in the resin. So I'll have to sand and apply another layer of filler, but I knew that from the start. Today is windy. I've coated all the areas that were sanded last time to fill in the remaining cracks. In areas with a high concentration of cracks, I applied several coats with strokes like these to fill them as much as possible. This should help create a smooth surface ready for paint. Ideally, the surface should be fully cleaned before starting repairs. But as I mentioned earlier, since I need to use the Velomobile regularly, I can't remove the reflective tape and drive without it. These windows were held on with double-sided tape, but over time it started peeling off, letting water seep in. I sealed the edges with silicone. Let's see how it holds up. The next step is sanding and then touching up the paint. Ideally, I would remove all the external parts and paint the whole surface, but that would mean I couldn't use it, so I'll be painting it bit by bit. But overall, it's already looking better than before the repair. What the heck? Birds messed up my entire surface. Hello again. I hope today I can restore the Velomobile to a state where I won't be embarrassed to ride it. It won't look so beat up anymore. I still can't paint the whole thing just yet, but I can tidy it up, get rid of the most visible blemishes, and make the body nice and white again so it looks good from a distance. That's what I'll be working on, and I hope I'll finish it today. This metal piece will stay rusty for now because it's too expensive to buy a can of black paint just for it. If I paint it white, it'll obstruct my view. I'll keep it like this until New Year's, when I'll have 2 weeks off for the so-called holiday break. Then I'll give the Velomobile a proper paint job. The birds helped by adding some camouflage, but you can't stop them. No big deal. Here's a close-up of how it looks after the first layer. You can see some defects here. I've applied a second layer, which is mostly thinner, though some parts still stick out, but overall it's thinner, so it'll be easier to sand. This time I'm using a larger sanding block. Unfortunately, the curved areas of the body are hard to reach with the sander, so I'll have to sand those by hand with sandpaper. Finally, we're ready to wrap up this stage. We'll save the full makeover for later. For now, we'll just make it look better than it was. And here's how it looks after the repair. Not perfect, but good enough for everyday use. On the road, you can't even tell it was damaged. Here's some footage from the road.